Hey everybody, I'm Dave Sandell,
And I'm Caleb Gardner.
and this is the Best Album 4 podcast, a podcast where we talk about the best album for starting a bar fight. Caleb, have you ever started a bar fight?
I can't say that I've started one, Dave. I've ended many.
I can't tell from your face right now if you're being serious or not. Have you been in a fight?
No,
period?
I have not been in a bar fight, of course
Have you ever
not.
been in a fight though?
No.
Like any kind of fist fight?
No, not really. You?
I have not. I've been on the brink in college. There were a few nights that got a little dicey.
College.
I've seen some friends get the snot kicked out of them, big swollen eyes
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
I saw that in high school. I didn't see any of that in college, but high school was definitely a lot of male anger being thrown around my dumb hometown.
College was a lot of alcohol. There's a lot of alcohol, just like too much. Not
Yes,
necessarily
that makes
by
sense.
me. I mean, sometimes by me, but like the community I was a part of just drank a lot, and so things would
Yeah.
happen.
There's some of that involved in high school too. What I love about the fact that we picked this topic is I was imagining you're at a bar and someone pisses you off and you're going up and you're fronting you're spitting your God, I can't even talk like I've been in a bar fight. You're saying insulting things to the other person and then you go, "Hold on." And you go over and you put the right music on and then you come back.
I need this.
Yes. Hold on, I
Yeah.
have to set the mood.
I have to admit that even in my imagination of starting a bar fight, I couldn't quite get to I'm the one initiating it. I had to start with like, okay, so something has happened. I've like rubbed somebody the wrong way. They have kind of motioned towards this is going to happen, and I'm deciding whether I'm going to participate or not. Like fight or flight's kicking in, and if my
Yes.
album pick kicked in at that moment, it might tip me over the edge of all right, let's engage. That was like the furthest I could actually get.
So you're saying
I don't think I
if
could
you're on
imagine.
if you're on the edge and all of a sudden
Yeah,
your pick for today comes on, you're like, "That's my sign."
not exactly. I think what I'm trying to say is, even in my imagination, I can't imagine what it would be like to start a bar fight. Except for I've seen Patrick Swayze do it so many times that I
Yeah.
know exactly what it would look like to start a bar fight.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we're defending someone's honor. I don't know who it is, but, it's gotta be for noble causes.
Absolutely. Can that noble cause be somebody looked at you the wrong way, or does it have to be more noble than that?
No, it's gotta be like somebody looked at, the Dalai Lama the wrong way or, I don't know. There's gotta be someone someone in the bar with you. You're out getting a drink with His Holiness, and somebody 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 knocks over his drink and starts saying Buddhism is stupid, and you're just like, hold on, let me put this record on.
I was thinking about like what types of records could even possibly get me on the brink of that, and I was coming up a little short. Even like the most intense music that I listen to, I still felt like I don't know if I have it in me. Like I don't know if I can physically do
Ah,
this. I have friends who would probably, if not start, certainly never back down. And whenever we talk about that experience for them, I'm always like they're speaking a foreign language. I don't understand the impulse to throw a punch.
yeah. It's definitely an impulse thing, that's for sure. Yeah, I think you and I are just pacifists. Our impulse is to try to diplomatically find a solution. We are the
Yeah.
Switzerland
Sometimes that
people.
solution is I'm gonna leave
Yeah,
because this is uncomfortable.
that's right. And we're
Caleb,
grown ass men now, and it's stupid to get in a bar fight.
right? We have kids and wives,
Yes,
and what are we doing?
yes.
Jobs that we need to not have black eyes for.
I feel like I don't know about you, but I know we've talked a lot about being high school and college years and all that, but I always kind of
Yep.
felt like that where I was like, what are we doing? Like that was always my perspective where I was just like, What is this?"
I think that I generally agree with you. I will say there were definitely times in college where somebody just wanted to fight and we're just like kind of picking that fight all night long with various people. And there were only
You
so
did?
many times. No, no, no. I'm saying I
Oh,
was
okay.
around that. No, no, no.
Ah.
Not me. I'm saying like sitting in a bar for an evening and somebody is just like itching to fight. And so they're like just trying to pick a fight. You know what I mean? They're just kind of I don't know, taking up as much space as they can take up in the bars. It
Yeah,
seems like in hopes that something will happen. And
right.
there's only so many times you can be kind of accidentally shoved before you're like, come on, this is not okay. And at
Yeah.
that point, my fight or flight kicks in, and I choose flight because I am who I am. I am how God made me. But I can get it. I can kind of get if you've had too much to drink, how your fight or flight kicks in the other way, and you're
Yeah.
just like, okay, I'm done being shoved now.
Yeah. I mean, I can see it. Again, I just don't I think it would take a lot to get me to that point, though.
Caleb, we have a very special episode coming up next week where our good friend Sydney is going to try to help us become Swifties. She's going to introduce us to the best album to become a Swiftie. And we've been doing some homework for that show where we've had to listen to a lot of Taylor Swift. What was your experience like this week going from Taylor Swift to music that you wanted to start a bar fight with?
Oh, see, I thought that you were trying to say, did that music make me wanna fight someone? And if that is what you were asking, it's absolutely yes. And and it was my own self for putting that in my headphones. It was a jarring experience. I would not say that all Taylor Swift music is not bar fight worthy. I could see it being like when someone comes over, knocks over the Dalai Lama's drink, you're like, "Hold on." And you go put Bad Blood on, you know?
So, but my question
Could
for you
happen.
is, are you more likely to fight if a bad song comes on? If a song that you hate comes on? Let's say that you're in this situation, the Dalai Lama's drink has been knocked over, and then like Bop comes on. I don't even know. Like, do you remember that song "New Age Girl" by Dead Eye Dick? Do you remember the
No, I
song? I
don't I
got a
don't remember
new
that one.
age girl. Tell us what she's like. Remember the song?
No,
It's
why do I not remember that song?
one of the worst songs ever. And I know every lyric to it, which
I
makes
was
me
gonna
so
say, and yet you
mad.
could pull it up, like, right away.
I hadn't thought about that song in decades. And somebody mentioned it on like a forum the other day. And I was like, oh my gosh, I remember every word. And I hate that song so much. And I imagined if that song came on the stereo, would it actually make my blood boil enough that I could be tipped over to defend the Dalai Lama's honor more than even like the albums that I'm choosing today?
So, your guy who's just sitting around in a bar looking to pick a fight, that might have been what happened. Maybe that song came on, and now he's like, "I just have to fight someone or something," you know?
For hours.
Yeah, for hours. It's
I
gotta
really
come
hate this
down.
this Guster album that's been playing for the last hour. And now we must throw down.
So, listener, if this isn't clear, we have very little experience in this area. Why do we keep picking topics of which we very little experience?
I think it's more fun that way. I feel like
Yeah.
we had a couple deep episodes in a row. And so I
Yeah,
feel like
that's
we just
true.
need like some palate cleansers. We need to like kind of
That's
pull it
very
back,
true.
just have some
Yeah.
fun.
I mean, the things that we picked today are objectively the right answers to this question.
I
So it
mean,
doesn't really matter that we haven't had that much experience.
there is a part of me that has assumed that this music was made for this specific situation. Like, it's hard for
There
me
you
to
go.
believe when I put my album on that they aren't actually in a fight at the moment. Like, at the time they're recording, I think there might be a bar fight going on.
Oh, there's definitely been some bands that record like that for
Well,
sure.
that's probably
So,
true. That's probably true.
yeah.
One of the albums that I considered briefly was this band called McClusky, who I really like.
Band is better than your band. We got more songs than a song convention. Sing it. My love is bigger than your love. Sing it. My love is bigger than your love. Sing it.
Didn't they come out with a new song recently? I feel like just came out with a new song.
So they actually just came out with 2 new songs, actually 4 new songs, and they're up on their Bandcamp page. So it's actually a really sad story. The lead singer had tinnitus and they had to cancel all their shows. And it's like apparently a really debilitating case
Oof.
that may or may not ever heal. And apparently now he has to wear these things on stage that are massive on his ears just to be able to play safely and not further damage his ears. So they
Wow.
had to cancel a bunch of shows. They still wanted to pay all the people who were going to get paid. And they want to reschedule those shows now that he's able to play again as long as he wears these crazy things
Yeah.
on his ears. And he said that apparently visas to come to the US and tour cost so much money. They're like so prohibitively expensive that they put these songs out on Bandcamp to essentially fund their visas so they could finish this tour and pay
Oh my
everybody
god.
who they had promised to pay as part of this tour, and for the fans who bought tickets. Those tickets have been refunded at this point. I'm looking forward to buying my new one. I've never seen them. They're definitely a bucket list band. But yeah, apparently, if you want to go support a really cool band getting their visas to come to the United States, check out McClusky on Bandcamp.
Wow. That's a much deeper story than I was expecting, which totally ruined your punchline about why this made you think of McCluskey in the first place. What was the bar fight connection?
So McClusky is this post-hardcore group that their lead singer, whose name is Andrew Falkus, has just made a career out of writing really irreverent, borderline silly, but have some meaning behind them lyrics that are super aggressive, and some of their song titles immediately make you think of being in a bar fight. So I'm just gonna pull up my favorite album by them is McClusky Do Dallas, and I'm gonna just read you a couple track names. I'm gonna bleep this out for fun. Lightsaber King Blues, To Hell with Good Intentions, this band,
Yes.
The World Loves Us and Is Our. Anyway, when I listen to McClusky, that music moves me to thrash around in my living room as I listen to it. And so I think that's just a little step away from throwing a punch. Like anything where I'm like sort of willing to be in a mosh pit feels, and actually we should talk about that for a second. Mosh pits are definitely the closest that I've
Yes.
been to actually being in a fight. Have you spent time in mosh pits?
Yeah, not as much as you have. Definitely not as much as you have, but a little bit.
I mean, I certainly haven't since I was in my 20s. Like
Yeah.
it's a young man's game for
Yeah,
sure.
100%.
But there were definite nights where I found myself in a mosh pit and went home bruised. I don't think I was ever like some mosh pits are like famous for like people coming out like really
Injured. Yeah.
injured. I don't know if I was ever in something that intense, but there was kind of a stretch there in like the late 90s, early 2000s where it seemed like the way people had fun at concerts was trying to hurt somebody as much as they could without getting in trouble.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. A lot of aggression, a lot of, again, toxic masculinity coming out in those environments, I think. But it makes sense. I mean, McCluskey, Taylor Swift, things that make you feel violent. I get there's a common theme.
Absolutely. It's like, kind of like Rage Against the Machine type stuff where it's like they're angry, so now I'm angry. I just saw this band Death Grips at Riot Fest this weekend, who I've sort of listened to. There's like experimental rap group. Do you know
No.
Death Grips?
What's that? Can't tell. They hell drink, shot in hell. Deep space ghetto drink. Show me something I ain't seen before, mystery hunter.
They're this experimental rap group that is super hardcore, and live and in person, they just lost their minds on stage. Like their lead
Yeah,
singer
in a
is
fun way?
screaming, oh yeah, just like screaming every lyric, and their drummer is going so fast. The guy who's playing guitar for them right now is just shredding like crazy, and it was so intensely exciting. It was definitely my favorite moment from the entire festival the whole weekend. But as I was listening to it, I was like being drawn into that type of intensity. Like I imagined that if I was a little closer to that stage, it would have been a lot of fun to just thrash around. And that's probably the
Yeah.
closest I've been. That's probably like mosh pits are the closest I've been to being in a proper a proper fight in my life.
Yeah. That also feels like a young man's game where it's like we wanna avoid bar fights and also watch mosh pits from a distance.
That's right. That's right. Anything else you want to talk about before we jump into our picks?
I don't think so. I'm pretty excited to chat about both of our picks today. I think they're both super fun albums. I mean, maybe you can listen to them without getting violent, like just like outside of a bar context too.
I did many times this week listen to these without getting violent. So it's
Yeah,
possible. You can do it.
nah.
Why don't you kick us off?
I chose the album from 1994, Smash by The Offspring. And I did not pick it, Dave, actually, for the title, which is very bar fighty. But I did pick it for the like, I don't know, underlying angst and like kind of, I don't know if it's unearned confidence as much as is like just stupidity that comes out from being like a young, dumb person. I feel like what we talked about in terms of a lot of bar fight energy is just about being young and dumb. And it's really hard for me to picture many bands that embody being young and dumb as much as The Offspring. I will say that like there are some songs on here that have in terms of lyricism, like a little bit more depth, like not the one where we talk about, like how basically all the old people are killing the planet, but the young people are gonna have to clean it all up. Still true, by the way. That's depressing. This was 94. That's still true. But, Nitro Youth Energy just coming out of the gate, just this smash bang song that's talking about being young and again having all this crazy energy that I'm not going to waste this life, right? Like I'm just going to go do what I want to do. And that theme just carries out through the whole album. I mean, Bad Habit is so much fun. Like, and the ones that people know the most from this album are going to be Come Out and Play, which is, of course, about calling someone out and like getting in fights. So, very appropriate. But Self Esteem is another one people would know very well. Probably some of the best known Offspring songs in general, those two, right?
Yeah, and Gotta Get Away as well. I think Gotta Get Away was another video on MTV that got a lot of play.
Yeah. This album was huge for them. Just to give it some context, like this was definitely my entry point to the Offspring. So I think pretty young, like this and Ixnay and the Ombre, which we've talked a little bit about before, were the ones that really got me into the Offspring. But this was like right around when Green Day was getting a little bit more popular and like a lot more mainstream. So I think my read of it is that they kind of rode that like more mainstream punk wave, but not quite as mainstream. It's funny because it's like what I'm reading says, along with Green Day's Dookie, Smash was responsible for bringing punk rock into the mainstream. But I just see these as such different. Like Dookie was just everywhere, whereas Smash, I feel like you still was kind of like you had, and I don't want to say you had to look for it, but it had to be on specific channels. I don't remember seeing like a lot of music video, at least not as much as Dookie around this time. I don't know. Were your experience of Smash differently
Well,
or
it's
different than
interesting.
mine?
I remember these bands being very tied together. And so like once Dookie hit, Offspring were either close behind or right before. And I remember hearing
Interesting.
these songs just as much as each other. So like I have heard Longview and Self Esteem the same amount of times. But I can tell you everything
Fascinating.
about the Longview video and everything about Basket Case video and the When I Come Around video. And I have no memory of the Self Esteem or Contemplate videos. So
That's what I'm
were they, maybe
saying.
they weren't being played on MTV? Like that seems weird though. Either maybe I just, like, heard these songs and bought the album like, so quickly that I just lived with it for a long time. These had to be big on MTV, right?
I
Maybe
I
not?
don't know. That's what I mean, we are now just like opining on the history of an album just based on our own personal experience, which we admittedly do a lot. Let's just
Yeah.
admit
We
that.
just usually make it
But
sound like we know what we're talking about more.
yeah, exactly. But like I remember maybe it's because back then your experience of the music world was so driven by MTV, at least
Yeah.
mine was,
Yeah.
that maybe that's why Dookie felt like such a bigger album than Smash. I mean, I think I actually listened to and love Smash more, but I don't remember seeing Smash at all on MTV. In fact, the first time I even remember seeing The Offspring on MTV at all was way later into their album history. It was just had
Pretty
this on
fly
the
for
tip
a
of my
white guy.
tongue. Yes, that fucking song. I hate that
I
song
hate that
actually.
song so much. It's actually when I jumped out. I was a little bit in until then, like, at least had one foot in, and Pretty Fly came out, and I was like, this I mean, that song it's fun for what it is, but I was like, this is no longer the same band.
That's what it felt. That's exactly what I felt like it was like Offspring or Smash is a punk album, and Ixnay goes a little bit more to that pop punk, and then you could, what were they doing? Like it just felt like, oh, now we've got to have some mainstream success. It just felt like they wrote something that they felt like would get bigger attention. And then that was the first time I remember actually seeing them on MTV, and I was like, oh, this band sucks now. All right, good to know. It's
I
kind of
definitely
sad.
remember I remember lots of Ixnay on MTV. All I Want was that Ixnay and the Ombre? Yeah.
Yeah, it
Uh,
was.
what were the big songs on that one?
All I Want was definitely a big one. And Gone Away.
Oh, sure, Gone Away. Yeah, I remember the Gone Away video being played a lot on MTV. But yeah, I actually just pulled these two videos up, Contemplate and Self Esteem, and I guess I sort of remember them, but these were not played all the time. So that it's strange that Offspring got so seemingly so popular so quickly without that same crossover appeal, but it was everywhere. I felt like you couldn't escape the Offspring at a certain point in 1994, 1995. Like they were as big as any other band. Did it feel like
That's
that? I mean,
fascinating.
did it feel like that to you in real time or
No, it didn't feel like that
yeah,
to me, and I don't know if it's because, again, it wasn't on MTV, I didn't have that many close friends listening to it, but it still felt very underground to me, which is a little weird to look back on and think about now. But anyway, it's we just spent like the first 10 minutes talking about what we didn't experience with this album. I will say again, just a super fun, straightforward punk album that gets out a lot of youth indiscretion and youth energy. That is, it just, again, in terms of the idea of let's go out into the night and go to a bar and do something stupid, it's right there, right? And I will say I don't I think I told you this story where, like, one time I put on The Offspring and my dad was like, "Nope, I can't listen to that." I think it has a lot to do with the lead singer's voice,
Dexter Holland.
Dexter
He's
Holland.
he's very singular.
He has a very specific kind of voice, which when it works, and if you like it, you like it, but much like Billy Corgan, like we've talked about recently, or other, bands with really distinct voices, he is not for everybody. It reminds me, I've been thinking about this a lot recently about why we love Smashing Pumpkins and some of these other singers with super, super distinct voices. And I actually think I remember reading this study that came out from the guy who started OkCupid. He wrote a book called Dataclysm a few years back that was just looking at the data from dating sites. Like he got a bunch of OkCupid data and a bunch of other data from other websites, and he just like analyzed it and then basically told us what it meant about America. And half of it was super depressing. But anyway, one of his insights was that people with more traditional looks, where it's all like all the kind of mainstream things you would expect about being good looking actually got fewer messages than people who kind of had one thing that was a little off about them. Just like I think of like Cindy Crawford's mole, like something like that that's like very distinct or like had a different kind of look that put them not kind of mainstream and they actually got more messages. I wonder if there's something like that where it's like if something feels a little distinct and not what you would expect, it has a little bit more appeal.
I certainly experienced that with like Pavement and Neutral Milk Hotel, like the indie bands from the 90s. The ones that felt like they lasted were the ones where the lead singer had a slightly off kilter voice. And the
Yeah.
ones that were maybe very popular at the time, but they haven't really held up. Their singers have kind of a, just a regular old voice. Yeah, that's fascinating. That's a really interesting insight.
Even other band like, on the more folk side, the ones we've talked about, like Counting Crows, think of Adam Duritz's voice, super distinctive. Think about, like, Frightened Rabbit. I mean, a lot of the bands we love, it's like they have super, super distinctive sounding lead singers. I don't know. I think there's something there.
So I feel like I missed pop punk. I had one of my best friends in high school was really into punk music or whatever. I always find it fascinating that people argue so much about the definitions of punk music and what is punk and what
Yeah.
isn't punk. So whatever was happening in the 90s on like Epitaph Records and whatever was happening in the 90s with like No Effects and No Use for a Name and Less Than Jake and all these other Pennywise, all these other bands who were just kind of coming out of seemingly nowhere, and the Warp Tour was happening. That whole vibe that I feel like the Offspring kind of fell into. A lot of those bands to me sound very similar. Like I feel like I
Yeah.
can't necessarily tell you, and I'm going to get torched for this by some of my friends and by some people who love music. I can't necessarily tell you the difference between like a Pennywise song and a No Effects song. I don't know that if you played them both to me, I'd say that's Pennywise, that's No Effects. I might be using the wrong examples here. Maybe one of those has a very distinct quality that I'm just forgetting about, but
Right.
I'm kind of using those as placeholders. Anyway, my larger point is a lot of those bands sound the same. A lot of their singers sound the same. And the ones that seem to like uh, maybe rise above that were the ones with really distinct voices, like, Tom DeLonge, we were talking about that, a couple weeks ago with Blink
Yeah.
182, and certainly Dexter Holland and Billy Joe Armstrong, and whoever else. There's a bunch of them that broke through, but even like the guys from Rancid. Rancid is like this, historic institution at this point, and those guys can't sing at all, and I think it makes the group what it is. Like their voices, them not being able to sing at all and still going for it, I think is a feature, not a bug of Rancid.
I mean, regardless, I do think that the distinct sound of Dexter Holland is a big reason why you recognize The Offspring, whether or not you like The Offspring, and I generally love this album, still have a lot of nostalgia for it.
Yeah,
Still love Ixnay and the Hombre. Those are my only 2 Offspring albums I really go back to,
sure.
but this was a huge album for them. I love this quote from Dexter Holland back in 1994. "When we recorded this album, our last one sold maybe 15,000 copies. So the possibility of us getting played on the radio or anything like that was pretty much non-existent." Isn't that
They they
fascinating
were
that,
on an
like, this
independent
was so
record label.
ubiquitous and
Yeah,
Smash was made with $20,000? Like,
yeah.
it's wild, like, what records, like, help bands break through.
I mean, they bankrolled their label to become a big label. Like they had. I read something. Was it The Offspring? I think it was The Offspring. I could be wrong about this. It was in the book that I referenced a while ago, on Sellout, that there was a point where I think it was Offspring. There was like the whole office was filled with Smash like CDs, and then they had to also rent storage spaces that were filled with Smash CDs. People's cars, people's homes were like filled with Smash CDs because they couldn't. They were an independent record label. They couldn't keep up with the demand. They had no capacity to have like to store as much as they had to create, in order to fulfill the demand for that record. And I think that's amazing. I
I
love
love
that.
that.
Yeah.
I just love stories like that in general. Yeah. I Anyway, go out, start a fight, listen to Bad Habit, and come out and play, and, you'll know what you're supposed to be doing.
Do you have like, so you kind of came up in more of the punk scene than I did. Are there other bands, around this time that you were really into? The kind of like I remember Bad Religion. I had their Stranger Than Fiction CD and played the heck out of that one. And I always remember feeling like Bad Religion is better than The Offspring, but The Offspring have sold millions and millions of records. And I've never 100% been able to put my finger on like why did they break out and why didn't Bad Religion or another band like them? Like what was it about, you know? Because the Offspring, they're a weird band. Like I want to read you some of
Yeah.
these lyrics. The lyrics on Bad Habit are, I guess at the time probably not that controversial. Now it's like this would not get made. So the gun in my, I'm not really, or I'm really okay. The gun in my hand will tell you the same. But when I'm in my car, don't give me no crap because the slightest thing and I just might snap. When I go driving, I stay in my lane, but getting cut off it makes me insane. I open the glove box, reach inside. I'm gonna wreck this effer's ride. I guess I got a bad habit of blowing away. Like this song is about him essentially like road rage happening and him
Yes.
shooting someone. Like is that what this song is about? This is like when you remember I realized that remember the Foster the People pumped up
Yeah.
kicks? That song, the lyrics are like all those kids with the pumped up kicks better run, outrun my bullet. Like, oh, you're killing them. Like these are
Oops.
lyrics that don't really I don't know if they fly
Yeah.
in 2023.
Well, I think that Offspring to I don't know what Foster the People is doing. The Offspring, I think we're trying to channel some of that Misfits vibe. I mean, like,
Oh, interesting.
they got a skull on the front of Smash, like a skeleton. They're
Mhm.
kinda doing this kind of horror punk, but, like, horror punk light. It's like, if horror punk and pop punk had a baby, it would be The Offspring. And I don't the only reason why I honestly think the only reason that they were the ones who popped, and it wasn't Bad Religion, it wasn't NoFX, it wasn't some of these other bands as much, is Dexter Holland's voice. Like, that's literally
Mhm.
the only I think that makes them so distinctive that some of these songs just sound quintessential, like, punk in the same way that Billy Joel Armstrong's song like voice makes it sound quintessential punk. You know what I mean?
Mm, interesting. Okay, I'm in. I'm in on that. What do you think's giving them staying power? Like they still like are touring arenas, or maybe not arenas, but they're touring like big venues, and they've produced many albums. Like, what has given them staying power? Is it just nostalgia for come out and
I don't
play?
know. They haven't stayed with me.
Rude, rude.
I mean, I think it's honestly, I think what gave them staying power is that they didn't like keep going down the pretty fly for a white guy, like trying
Well, yeah,
to.
there you go.
I mean, that's the only thing I can think of is that they
But they did, right?
realized
Didn't
that
they
was
do why don't you get a job? Wasn't that on the one after Pretty Fly?
wasn't that? I thought that was on the same album,
I don't think so. I might be wrong, but I don't think
Americana.
so. I think Why Don't You Get a Job is
Hold
after that.
on. We're gonna check this shit because Dave is calling me on my Offspring knowledge right now. Nope. Why don't you get a job? Also on Americana,
Oh,
released
so I'm cutting this whole
1998.
thing.
Of course you are.
No, I'm not. I'll leave it. I'll
I
own
would
my
say that
mistake.
just to clarify the record, I I liked Offspring, I like Green Day, I like some punk bands when I was growing up, but I really didn't get into punk. I got into it more as an adult.
Oh, okay.
Got
Fair
into it
enough.
like what, 5, 10 years ago?
Oh, that recently.
Yeah,
Oh, I don't
yeah.
think I knew
And then
that.
I kind of went back through the catalog, which was super fun to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. One last thought on the Offspring, real quick. Sticking on Bad Habit. Is there a more fun lyric to drive around and scream at the top of your lungs? And I'm going to bleep this again for effect. You stupid.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to talk. I meant to talk about that. Yeah, that's one of those where you're listening to it as a kid and you just like feel so cool saying it along with it. You
Yes,
know, like they made
100%.
that for like teenagers to feel cool saying
Yep.
it.
That's fun. I love that. My pick this week is a grandfather of the Offspring. It's Iggy
Yeah.
and the Stooges' Raw Power.
Honey, gotta help me, please. Somebody gotta save my soul. Baby, detonate for me.
The Stooges' third record. So they put out 2 records as the Stooges. They broke up because everybody hated everybody else, and they got kicked off their label. And then several years later, they sort of reformed in a kind of super shitty way to be Iggy and the Stooges, where they shuffled around some members and didn't invite original founding members to join them until the people they did invite backed out. Then they did invite the founding members to come back, but told them they had to play different instruments. It's just a mess.
Oh my
Uh,
god.
these guys were, they're a bunch of kids from Ann Arbor, Michigan, who are listening to the Velvet Underground and being really frustrated with music in the 60s. Like they were not interested in any more of the music that we were talking about last week, in the 60s, and
Yeah.
kind of set out to end it, to like put a nail in the coffin of that kind of like folksy Woodstocky music. And I've heard stories where bands who like played Woodstock would show up, or like would let the Stooges come on as their like opening act in some other town, and these hippies would like come to the show, and then the Stooges would be on stage like like writhing around. Iggy Pop like used to cut himself on stage, which seems insane, but that's what he did. And, they just like they were belligerent and probably drunk and high, and apparently people would just boo them out of there and have no idea what they just saw. But the Stooges just made an effort to be as countercultural as possible, and they sold very few records. Nobody was into them. There were very few critics who were into them, and I don't totally understand how these things happen, but at some point, the Stooges caught the imagination of like 100 other people who went on to start their own bands, and suddenly the Stooges become an institution as sort of the prototype of what becomes punk music in the 80s with the Clash and the Ramones and other bands like that. So the
So
Stooges have
wild.
3 albums that are each worthy of being played while you're starting a bar fight. I picked Raw Power only because Gimme Danger is one of the like 10 greatest songs ever written. And when that little clinky piano comes in, that is the moment. That is the moment where I think I might my fight or flight might go the other direction. Like if Gimme Danger comes on the stereo, it's like this low rumble of a song where it's kind of all like this seething, threatening, kind of aggressive quality to the music, but they don't necessarily let that out. Like it's all kind of like riding right on the surface. And this song sounds like it's just ready to explode at any moment. By the end, it does finally explode, and it feels like all hell is broken loose. And that's the moment in the song where he's like, where they it feels like the band has now entered the crowd and started a fight right there in the bar that they're playing in. I really love this record. I've been listening to this record for the last 20 plus years, and every song on it, and every song by the Stooges has that same quality of kind of low-key threat, not even low-key, like just real threatening music all the time. Like this stuff, I think now maybe it might sound a little more tame than it did, but I try to imagine it in the setting of Cat Stevens, and it's suddenly
Oh my
or
God.
Yellow Submarine or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I get it. Like I get how this created a whole movement that I don't necessarily wouldn't say that the Stooges had anything to do with Led Zeppelin or the other bands that became huge in the 70s, but I do think that they played their part in transitioning out of the 60s and into a more aggressive, more meaty and muscular
Yeah. Apparently in a
rock
way that was
music.
pretty underground, where they were
Yeah,
influential in a way that no one saw coming.
for
Can I
sure.
read you this quote? I think you will love this quote from
Yeah,
the
please.
music critic Joe S. Harrington called this album a sledgehammer attack of brutal ill will.
Nice. Yes.
If that's
Yes,
not good
Joel.
for a bar fight, I don't know what is.
This is easily and really Iggy's songs after this. I think about Lust for Life. Some of the other ones that he, Real Cool Time or The Passenger, where they would serve fine in a bar fight, but there was some quality about the Stooges that felt more dangerous. And when I think about let me, I Want to Be Your Dog. When the tambourine part comes in on I Want to Be Your Dog, I feel ready to do something. I don't know what that is exactly, what my version of a bar fight is. I guess drive a little faster or get my groceries a little harder. I don't really have a good outlet for this pent up aggression and energy, but it's palpable. It's hard for me to believe somebody could listen to this and not have their heart rate go up a little bit and just be a little bit more on edge. And I find that
Yeah.
pleasurable. I can appreciate that other people might not find that pleasurable.
This is proto-punk, right?
Yeah,
This
I
is
mean, I think that's how it's
this is
understood
basically
now.
the birth of punk. It's said that the Sex Pistols really covered them a lot. I mean, it feels like the Sex Pistols, the Clash, some of these bands that were hugely influential to the hardcore punk movement,
In the UK, yeah.
um, all owe it to, Search and Destroy, I Wanna Be Your Dog, these songs that the
Sure.
Stooges really, perfected the sound, and especially the live shows, I the Sex Pistols being so kinda controversial in the UK and, so in your face, so counterculture. Doesn't it feel like that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Iggy?
I feel that way, but it's interesting because I also would say Iggy doesn't happen without Lou Reed, or Iggy doesn't happen without Jim
That's fair.
Morrison.
Yeah.
So it's there's just a lineage, right? So it's
Yep.
cool that Iggy's a part of that. Iggy's a big part of that. He kind of changed what a live show looked like. And not necessarily for the better. I don't know that a man going up on stage, showing everybody his genitals and cutting himself with shards of glass is the thing that I want when I go to a show.
Yeah, that's fair, that's fair. Was this happening around the same time as Ozzy Osbourne was getting, pretty famous for some insane things on stage? What I'm trying to get at is, were the late '60s, early '70s just the time when you tried to kind of outshock people on stage? We're just getting beyond the, musicality of it, now it's just all performance, you know?
Yeah, 100%. But 1970, first Black Sabbath album, they go on to inspire hundreds of bands as well. And, you know, and I have no sense of if Iggy Pop and Ozzy Osbourne ever crossed paths or ever shared the same circles. I'm assuming once they were in New York, they must have.
Yeah.
But yeah, it all feels like it's part of the same movement. I think it's interesting. I think there's this thing that happens in music history where similar things bubble up at the same time in different parts of countries. So the most obvious version of this is everything that was happening in Seattle in the early 90s and late 80s, you know, with Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and
Yep.
Pearl Jam or Mother Love Bone and Nirvana. And at the same time, you know, there's bands like the Smashing Pumpkins in Chicago who are also reaching for something similar. It's not the same. We've kind of covered why it's different, but there are similarities in their sound and in some of the ways that they are approaching production, especially. And so it's interesting to me that throughout history, there's sort of these pockets of types of music that seem to bubble up in different cities, but at the same time. Like
Yeah.
multiple people were ready for this type of music to change. And it took some
Yep.
visionaries, Tony Iommi and some of these other guitarists who were developing their sound. Jimmy Page, the guys in Pink Floyd, like this stuff was all kind of coming up at the same moment. And it all seems like in reaction to what came before, just like all the 90s stuff seemed like you know, a reaction came before it.
Yeah.
And it's like a reaction in the same direction. I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating because I feel like after that, like you have all of the people kind of building on what the kind of mainstream artists in the 60s do, and you give this whole underground and quickly not underground culture reacting against it.
Yeah.
And then from there, it just feels like a thousand flowers bloom in both, all
Yeah.
directions. And we kind of have modern music the way it is. It's like the only kind of thing that feels kind of uniquely different. It doesn't build on either of those is like the birth of hip hop, right? Which is you could argue builds on a lot of things that came before it, but is also unique in its own way. It is really cool to trace back the lineage and like think about what these things owe to each other and like be able to give them their equal due.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's interesting. I feel like that happens less now. And I imagine the reason is that we've just become genreless.
100%.
They're just making music out of this pastiche of all these different influences that they've had. Whereas I feel like the Stooges are a reaction, but they are strong. They are so clearly inspired by Velvet Underground or the Doors or whoever else. You can kind of feel the lineage, and there's not a lot of like. I wouldn't expect a Stooges song that brought in like folk music as one of its pieces. And now it's just all bets are off. You can do whatever you want. You can go alt country for a few songs and then, you know, swing it around and have a weird hardcore EDM moment. And it's really bizarre. It's like kind of disorienting, and it makes it hard to predict where music is going next. And also I think makes it hard for new things to happen and for us to recognize them as a new thing happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's weird that we live in a genreless world, but also I kind of like it. Like I like when artists pull from lots of different quote unquote like bucket, like these were all made up anyway. So I kind of like that it's blending together. I'm hoping that still we can create some distinct sounds that don't have to be like labeled any one thing.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page. I do miss sometimes. Like, I'm just in the mood or I guess it still exists, but I'm just in the mood for, like a very specific type of rock album, and there's just nobody
Yeah.
making that type of rock album anymore, but that's not necessarily true. I think there are. You just have to search a little harder for them.
Yeah, that's true. I think if anything that people still make that as a reaction against the genreless stuff, right? Like in terms of like trying to create a distinctly punk sound or a distinctly old school hip hop sound or whatever.
Anything else you wanna say about Iggy Pop before we transition here?
What do you want to say about it? You're the one about to start a fight.
I don't really wanna be in a fight. I think now that I'm in my 40s, I think that the time in my life where I'm curious about what that feels like is over, and
It's
I'm
too
not
late, Dave.
I'm
It's
not
too
very
late.
interested in that. It's wild to me that there are people in their 40s who get into bar fights. Like that's a thing that happens probably every
It
night,
is.
every night of the year in multiple cities in America, and that's very strange. And I guess alcohol is the reason, and probably other issues as well. But I'm now past the point where I'm interested in it. I will say when I was first listening to the Stooges, there was some part of me that's like, I wonder what it's like because I bet these guys have gotten punched. Like they sound like people who like are just lanky and muscular and sinewy and probably have been in a fight or two. And it's hard for me to believe that you're making this music without having been in a fight or two. And I have no idea what that's like. So this is like another one of those doing peyote in the woods where I'm going to have to ask my friends, does it, is your fighting experience enhanced by the music that's playing in the background? Like, are you so tunnel visioned at that point that it doesn't really matter? Am I just assuming that it will because in Roadhouse and whatever other movies
I
where
was
bar
gonna
fights
say
happen,
it's the
there's music
soundtrack to
playing?
movies. That's what ruins us.
It's right. It's always my imagination is formed by movies.
Yep.
And there's always music. There's always music in the background. So when I first heard these records, there was some part of me that was curious, curious about what it would be like to go listen to Iggy Pop and get into a fight. And that's a
What do
weird
you think it
quality because there's not other music. It's not like I listened to Radiohead and thought, I wonder what it's like to be in a fight. Like there's something about this music
No.
that like brings that out in me.
No, Radiohead is when you've had way too much to drink. Like you're at the other end. You're not hyped up anymore. Now you're sad and depressed and somebody needs to just take you home. What do you think it is about like I guess like it's interesting that we picked like albums in the same lineage, I guess you would say,
Yeah,
in terms of like proto
true.
punk and then clearly like pop punk getting into like more mainstream. What do you
Mm,
think it is about punk that like we went
yeah,
to that?
I
That was the
think
genre we reached for this topic.
I think it's all id. Like I think these bands. Something I've learned about the punk scene is that the reason why I don't connect with it as well as other people is because I just didn't do concerts. Like I just didn't have access to
Ah,
concerts when I was growing up. And by the time that I had access to concerts, I didn't have any money. And so I just never saw these bands live. And the reason why it all sounds kind of similar to me is because I don't have anything attached to it. Like I haven't gone to the concerts and attached part of me to this experience. And everybody I know just like can't talk about punk music without talking about certain concerts that they remember. And it seems like it's a very communal thing and it's a very like
mm,
you're part of a larger thing and you hear about like, the Bleecker Street stories with Green Day and where like these little punk bars like wouldn't let Green Day play there anymore after they sold out, quote unquote, and went to a
right,
major
right.
label. And so I think that punk music is all id. It's music that's like really accessible to people who don't necessarily know how to play their instruments excellently. That's the
That
right
is very
word.
fair. Yes.
And and maybe for singers who aren't really reaching to be like, like Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins is attempting to be a huge rock star. And I don't get the same impression from punk band singers. They're very rarely looking to be a huge rock star. And it seems like there's just sort of this like balled up energy and aggression. You can just like play really fast and that's a feature. Like everybody's excited when you play
Yep.
really fast. And so this music all just feels like it comes from that same part of our brains that also control, do we want to get into a fight?
Yeah.
Like I think about
That
like
makes a lot of sense.
when Fight Club came out and I started listening to the Pixies, who I'll talk about, during honorable mentions a little bit. I was like, oh, I get it. Like this is it's just birds out of that same part of your brain that is a little crazy, and
Yep.
the little crazy that like kind of pushes you over the edge into a little angry and whatever else. Does that make sense? Does that read to you?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like it's music for people who have no access to their emotions in real life.
Or too much access, as it would later happen with emo and
Yeah,
some of
maybe.
the other offshoots.
Yeah, maybe, but it does feel just like an outlet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds right to
I
me.
I mean, just to go in honorable mentions, I also was just thinking about like what is this as a genre? Because I almost immediately thought of it. I mean, obviously there's lots of options within it,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I was thinking about metal in terms of like do I go back to Master of Puppets with Metallica or
Mm,
back to Ozzy or something that's like or even, like, something hardcore like the kind of people, that, like,
yeah,
don't
yeah.
even like, there isn't even words there. It's just, again, get a
Yep.
pure
It's like guttural.
anger or
Yeah,
emotion or at least feigning anger. I don't those people can't be angry all the time. Like, is
probably
that
not.
the right thing? I don't know. I just at the speed at which punk comes at you still felt like the right call.
Yeah. The speed is a big part of this because
Yeah,
you have to make a split
100%.
second decision. Like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna engage. I'm not
Yep,
gonna diffuse. And
yep.
if I'm listening to Metallica, there's just too long to decide. Like
Yeah, that's right.
the build up takes too long, and not too long for the music. Metallica's amazing. I'm just saying the build up takes too. It gives me too much time to reconsider my actions
That's what I'm
before it
saying.
gets to the
Yeah, it's
wild
like a
part.
slow burn, and you need something that comes on, like, hot and
Yeah.
heavy, like you're right, before you have a chance to think about it.
One of my honorable mentions is the Pixies, and specifically it's the song "Gouge Away."
If you want
So it's off of Doolittle. It's the last track on that album. And the first time I heard it, I remember like something shifting in my bones, like where I was like, oh, this is really cool. I think I talked about this in the episode about driving by a group of youths. Like, I think a
Yes.
song that it's really cool and also a little seedy or a little threatening. The Pixies have a number of those songs. They also have a number of songs that are like do 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 like, and so it's hard
Uh-huh.
for me to ever pick the Pixies as a bar fight band because I feel like
Yep.
you're in that moment and then suddenly like, Here Comes Your Man comes on. It's like, well, I'm not gonna fight during Here Comes Your Man. So uh
I thought that same so I thought about The Clash, and I thought about it for the same reason. It's like for every London Calling, there's kind of like a dancey, almost like mm, poppy song. I don't
yeah.
know.
I thought about this indie rap group called Cannibal Ox and their record, The Cold Vein. There's a bunch of like little indie kind of experimental rap records that are pretty aggressive and pretty intense that I think could work well in a bar fight situation. Certainly stuff like Run the Jewels. I mentioned before Death Grips. Like there's some of these bands that I think would work pretty nicely. I think I remember listening to like clips back in the day and thinking like, I'm a little, yeah, this is provoking. This music is provoking me. DMX a little bit.
This music is provoking me. I'll give one more honorable mention, and that is Rage Against the Machine. I mean, pretty much any Rage album could do. I mean, it literally has Rage in the title.
Yes.
But I don't know. I might throw up Evil Empire. I might throw up self-titled. I mean,
Come on,
again,
man.
hard to go wrong.
It's Battle of Los Angeles
Why is it Battle of Los Angeles?
because it's the battle.
Because it's the battle.
I mean, first of all,
Oh,
it's because it's their
again,
best album. But also, I assume you disagree with that sentence that it's their
I
best
was gonna
album?
say, I think we might have to go to war on that
We
one.
might do we should do like an episode sometime where we exchange records from the same artist and you like go to
Oh,
bat for your
interesting.
favorite and I go to bat for my favorite. Because I'll talk about Battle of Los Angeles any day of the week.
I mean, it's just hard. I mean, there's so much good stuff there. It's
Yeah.
hard to go wrong if you're looking for bar fight music with pretty much anything Rage.
Offspring Smash, does that go into your canon? Into the Caleb Gardner canon?
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely. I mean, I feel like I've listened to this album just for fun recently.
Okay.
I was like on a road trip or something, and I was like looking through, like what have I not listened to? And I was like, oh, Smash, yes, and I just put it in. And it was just,
Nice.
I just love this album. It's so much fun.
I was on a treadmill, not recently. My most recent time that I listened to this album, I was on a treadmill and I was just really having a bad day. I was just dragging and I needed something to like I just needed something to like get me to a new level where I could continue on this treadmill. And I thought of the Offspring and it worked very, very well.
There you go.
So yeah, not in my canon, but deeply love the record and have lots of memories of driving around blaring it out
I
of
feel like the
my
Stooges might work well
Camry.
for our what was our like working out when you don't want to,
Yeah, for sure.
right?
They're on my list then. Yep,
Bring some of that raw power to, hitting the heavy bag or lifting some
absolutely.
weights.
Oh, I should probably say so. I am gonna put Raw Power into my canon. And probably would put the other two records in there as well. So there's a David Bowie mix of this record and an Iggy Pop mix. David Bowie produced this record, and all respect to David Bowie. I'm happy to bow down at the altar of David Bowie when called upon. I will genuflect in his direction, and also this is not a good record. His version of it is not good. Like it's not. It just loses so much of what I think makes this record special. And so I would point you to the Iggy Pop production of raw power, and that's the one that you're going to find, I think, as the sort of default. But they both are out there recently because there was an anniversary release. So if you're trying to decide, pull up the Iggy Pop version.
Good clarification. What do you listen to this week?
So I'm still kind of working through all the stuff that came out in early September. There was such an avalanche of good music.
God, me
Um,
too.
I kind of called my shot on Slowdive, Everything Is Alive a few weeks ago, and then decided not to. And I could have. Turns out I could have, because that record lived up to all my expectations. It is another great entry into their catalog. Slowdive for me, this will come up in some episode at some point, but Slowdive for me is just the best music to put on in the background on a random Saturday morning. Or even sitting out by the fire. I love putting Slowdive on, and this record is shoegazy in the best ways, bliss pop in the best ways. So really loving that. And then more kind of blast from the past stuff. Chemical Brothers came out with a new record called For That Beautiful Feeling. We talked about the Chemical Brothers on that episode you mentioned earlier, the Working Out When You Don't Want to. You guys know that their record Dig Your Own Hole is one of my very favorite records. I've loved singles here or there from the Chemical Brothers in the intervening 20 years, but this new one, For That Beautiful Feeling, is front to back awesome, and gets me going so quickly. Live Again and No Reason are just like just like walls of good energy, and it'll make you want to do all the things EDM is supposed to make you want to do, and it just keeps going from there. It's just a beautiful record. It's warm and deep, and there's stretches in the middle that go on a little too long, like all the best Chemical Brothers records do, and get a little too housey, a little too samey for a minute, and then they pull out of it and course correct, and it's awesome again. But it's just a really, really strong record, and a very surprising one kind of this late in their career. I kind of gave them up for this is a band that I will just look forward to a song here or there, and hopefully catch them live at some point. But they put out another banger. Great record.
Nice.
How about you?
I'm going to surprise you, and I'm going to pull out another electronic album, actually, that I've been listening
Okay.
to that I almost forgot about, but I've been putting this on while I've been working. This for me has been a good, like, put it on while in the background while you
Okay.
need to get something done, and it is the new album Alchemy by Disclosure.
Oh,
Is
okay. I
Disclosure
actually didn't know Disclosure had a new album.
Yeah, I found it recently and put it on, and, just randomly for something to listen to while I was working, and like I said, it's fit the bill, and Disclosure is a hit or miss band for me.
Hmm.
They had an album back in 2015 called Caracal, I think I'm pronouncing that right. I really loved it because they featured a lot of artists on it that I enjoy, and I thought the partnership really worked, and then since then, every time I see them come out with something, I'll kinda put it on, and I'll be like, "Meh, it's fine." It's a little dance hall, a little too dancey for me.
Yeah.
I think this album moves more into the electronic than the dance, and I think
Okay.
that's why I like it more. But you should listen to it. I should be interested. You specifically, Dave, not listeners. Listeners, you can take it or leave
It's a
it.
good
Dave,
clarification.
I want to hear what you think
Yeah.
about this, given your love for electronic music.
I loved their first record, Settle, back in 2013, and I've kind of lost
Nice.
track of them since then, so I'm looking forward to it.
Other than that, this has been similar to you. Like I'm like really having a hard time keeping up. There's been so much good stuff, and I'm also like anticipating just so much stuff that's coming out. Did you
Mm.
know the National just randomly came out with a new album like yesterday, like very
Yeah, second
recently?
one, second one this year.
Yeah, so I'm obviously gonna give that a spin at some point. There's been oh god, just to give a shout out to some really good things that have come out. I'm still looking to the new album from Glasser is coming out soon. There's gonna be a new Crosses, which has come out with a couple of good singles. That's Chino Moreno's side project, lead singer of Deftones side project. So there's just a lot of good stuff in the pipeline that I'm really looking
Mm.
forward to that has had some really good singles come out recently. Jamila Woods, every single from her new album I've really loved, so looking forward to that. There's some good like punk songs. Talking on the Internet by Spiritual Cramp. I'm looking forward to that Spiritual Cramp album.
I don't know that one. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, you should. It's good. Some good stuff. The Kills have had a few good singles. They're coming out with a new album. Anyway, lots of good stuff coming down the pipeline still that I'm like not even caught up on the like albums I want to listen to because so many good albums came out recently.
All right, man. We have had another successful foray into our imagination exercises of things that are never going to happen to the two of us. But we know exactly what it would be like because we
Things
can
that we
imagine the music.
don't want to happen. Yeah, at least.
I guess, yeah, I should knock on wood. So as always, hit us up. I'm Dave Sandell on Instagram and I suppose Twitter, though I gotta admit I'm never on there. Caleb is Caleb Gardner, and we would love to engage with you about your favorite records for starting a bar fight. If you have any suggestions for future topics, we'd love getting those, and we like doing our homework and deciding what is objectively the best record that no one will ever have a different opinion about. So thanks for listening, and we will see you next week for Becoming a Swiftie.